Hello everyone, welcome to this new episode from the Central European city of Altengrad in city Skylines. In the past episode, we built the first tram depot in the city. It served nicely as an expansion of the previous parts, like the hospital complex and the blocks around the railway that we built earlier. Today we will continue right next to the depot area. We will extend some infrastructure, build a couple of residential blocks, but most importantly, in this nice open space on the edge of the city, we will build a huge modern industrial zone. So let's go. The second industrial area was a project that I planned for a really long time. I already knew that in this particular place I wanted to build it. It's just that I waited for some, more expansion of the city so that it's not going to be completely disconnected from what we already finished, from what we already built. Now, Altengrad obviously has an industrial zone already. It's not exactly big. It's part of the cargo harbor. The cargo harbor was always meant to be just it, the harbor, some warehouses around it, but not really like a big industrial park. So that was definitely going to be some kind of a different place around the city, and it felt nice to have it built in this area. This place is definitely very close to the railways, going into both of the train station and through the city, through the main train station. So there are going to be lots of possibilities, lots of connections, and even the road infrastructure is going to be quite suitable with the connections to the rest of the city, because we can connect pretty much everywhere. We can connect even into the older parts of the city, into some residential areas where obviously workers might be living and stuff. So it's definitely a good idea to build some kind of industrial zone in this area. And again, it's going to serve, nicely to just finish this edge of the city, because this industrial area is going to be the edge of the city. It's not necessarily going to be like a very hard edge of the city, so that there's nothing going to be built, after it. But it's probably going to be some kind of border of the actual Altengrad city, and maybe after it we're going to build a couple of small villages that may or may not be part of the city as the time progresses, obviously. So similar story to the town or the smaller city that we have built on the edge of the cargo harbor, right? So anyway, what's going on over here? What am I doing with all these roads? So this is going to be basically a main road outside of the city. It's obviously very modern because it's super straight in through this area, but it probably wasn't always like this. I'm later going to add some residential blocks that are not exactly going to follow the shape of this road, so that might give you an impression that this road was not always in here. And it looks very modern as well with the trams, how it's going through the middle. The tracks are going through the middle, and it's very wide with all those streets, with both of those streets on the sides, right? It's not necessarily going to stay like this forever. I might just change it as the time progresses, because right now it's only a single lane in each direction for the cars. So, there's some room for expansion if we decide to just do some changes to this area. So, it doesn't really matter how it's going to perform traffic-wise right now. I'm doing already some kind of detailing in here, doing some kind of an entrance to the industrial zone, because at this point I wasn't exactly sure what kind of buildings I'm going to use in this area. So I'm mixing some very large structures, like for example those I think these are the U-boat halls. I'm not exactly sure, but I think they are. And some of these warehouse buildings, production buildings, something like that, the bigger ones. And some older buildings that I had forever, the warehouses, small warehouses, and some of those just small industrial buildings here and there. So there are definitely going to be a lot of different structures in this industrial area. I don't want to just copy paste some of these bigger structures everywhere. They are going to be copied a couple of times because it makes sense. This factory is probably going to look like it's been built in like one project. Maybe it belongs to one company or something. And it's very modern. It's very recently built. So it makes sense that some of the buildings are just going to repeat themselves here. And, I just don't have that many buildings anyway. So it's kind of necessary to do it that way. One very important piece of infrastructure that I need to start with pretty much is the railway, of course, because this factory, I'm not exactly sure what it's producing. I'm thinking that it might actually be like a railway car factory, or maybe even an engine factory or something like that, some kind of machinery. Not exactly sure, it doesn't really matter, but it definitely matters that it's going to be connected to the railway, and all these bigger structures especially are going to have the railway connections. So I'm making sure that we have connections even from inside of the city. Maybe there could be a connection to the tram depot. Maybe this is a tram factory, or later it might be, not sure. And there's also a connection, outside of the city. I'm thinking that there probably needs to be some kind of a rail yard as well, further away from the city, basically after this junction towards the industrial zone, because there needs to be some kind of a parking lot for the exported products maybe, or something, or the empty cars, something like that. I was thinking that maybe that's going to be a good opportunity to build something similar to what we did in the cargo harbor, or on the edge of the cargo harbor, where we did that smaller rail yard as well, which is also a train station for that village, or the small town. So we can do something very, very similar in there as well. I haven't planned it right now, but it's probably going to be a very good idea to do it. We even have the trams going this direction, so they can connect to that town just like they did on the opposite edge of the city, right? But that's just a future plan, a future idea, a possibility that may or may not happen, but it probably will, because it makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so that's pretty much the railway is finished. As you can see, one railway, one connection, one track is going across that main avenue, the main street. So it's obvious that we are going to build this industrial area on both sides in there. So that's going to have the railway connection as well. And now I'm just filling the place with some more industrial buildings. By the way, this was super satisfying to do, because I had the opportunity to just build pretty much whatever I want in this area, kind of randomly. Just place all these industrial buildings that I had. So some of these buildings we have already seen, especially the smaller ones, the older looking buildings. But the new buildings, those I was looking, very much forward to building, and even some of these chimneys and smokestacks and all that. This building right now that I'm kind of putting together in here, I'm thinking it's some kind of a power plant, like a coal power plant. So I built like a roof over some kind of unloading station for the coal maybe, and it's just going to be hidden. It's just not going to be all that detailed. I was looking at Google Maps a lot when I was building this project. I was just looking at various industrial areas, mostly around Central Europe, and just taking inspiration from it. Not really like the configuration of particular buildings, but I was looking, for example, at the railways, how they're done, and it was kind of surprising that there are not so many tracks going into these industrial areas, even though it might be industrial areas that are producing, like I said, for example, some railway vehicles, right? So there are usually just a couple of tracks going into these buildings, because every time you finish a product, let's say like a train engine, I guess, then it's just going to leave the factory, very quickly, and it's just going to be parked somewhere else, I guess. So there's not that much need for like a huge parking lot of the exported products or finished products right inside the factory, but somewhere outside of it. And like I said, that might be a good opportunity for some kind of a rail yard just outside the industrial zone, further away from the city. It doesn't really matter. We are going to figure out that part, that detail later. This, what I'm doing in here, is going to be some kind of residential expansion, and this is actually a part of the city, or part of this project, this area, that I was kind of struggling with, because I was not sure what to build here, and I'm definitely cutting out a lot of the recorded building footage. By the way, this was exactly what I was talking about. I was intentionally angling some of these lines of buildings away from the road to kind of make it look like the road was not exactly in this configuration. I think I talked about this and did something similar with the tram depot as well. When I built some of those lines of buildings further away from the street, so that the street might not have been always there. It's been rebuilt to fit the trams, for example, or maybe it's been widened for just a higher capacity of the cargo, because there is the industrial zone. It is going to have a lot of trucks going away from it. So I was just filling that place with lots of residential buildings. It was not exactly something that I necessarily wanted to do in this place, but at the same time, it was kind of necessary because we do have some residential parts, on the other side of that railway. So we needed to continue that, and I figured that maybe I'm just going to do like a very messy looking, low density buildings here and there with maybe some dirt roads in the middle, and maybe it's going to be some sort of workers housing, like low income workers housing, something like that. And it might actually get demolished as the time progresses. Maybe it's going to be replaced by some modern structures, workers housing, like concrete workers housing, something like that as we progress in time. And I do have maybe some plans for some infrastructure changes in that area as well. So that's definitely going to be an area that I'm not going to detail that much, but I will detail it somewhat, because it's not finished, by the way. It's not going to be finished after today's episode. I kind of abandoned it. I only wanted to fill it with buildings, but the detailing is going to be part of some different video. I'm not even going to show that residential area much in the cinematics, but these couple of blocks that are closest to the industrial zone, those I will finish, because they are going to be visible from all these streets. So that kind of makes sense that it's going to be nice and done with today's project. Anyway, moving on the opposite side of this main avenue, and there's something very important going on, and that's the landscaping. So you could have seen me build that road that's kind of going off the city, kind of nowhere right now, but I'm thinking that might be like a historical position of some road going into Altengrad. So it's probably going to be very important. There might be some low density residential buildings right next to it, but it's going to be mostly just like a very open edge of the city. Well, not open, there are probably going to be forests or something, but I'm probably going to start doing some farmlands as well, or stuff like that. Doesn't really matter right now, but it's definitely going to be the edge of the industrial zone, the hill. So the industrial zone is pretty much in a very low area compared to the rest of the terrain. It's right close to the river, but in some sort of a valley that has the river on one side and this plateau for the industrial zone on the other. But on the other side of the river, there is some kind of a hill, and in here, it's also going to have a higher terrain. And it's also going to form a nice transition to that hill or the elevated area where the railway tunnel is going into, right from the main train station. So it's kind of going to make more sense, because I am doing these landscaping changes kind of on the go. I didn't plan this at the start of the map. You could have probably remembered that from the first episode when I was doing the hill for the castle. That was also not part of the map, but I just placed it there and then changed it as time progressed, and I had better idea about the rest of the city, right? So these kinds of landscaping changes I'm definitely going to do some more, especially towards that railway tunnel that I mentioned. Anyway, I pretty much finished the rough layout of the buildings on the other side of the industrial zone, and I'm starting to do these roads inside the zone, because unlike most of my projects, this industrial zone is actually going to be like very, very much functional. Some buildings, but only a handful of buildings in this area, are procedural objects, maybe some of those smokestacks or something, and a couple of decorative buildings that are just forming some elements. But it is mostly going to be functional. And look at this. This is probably like the pinnacle of functionality in this project, and that's the cargo train station. So this is actually working cargo train station in this industrial zone, something I haven't really done even in Aurelia just yet. So this is going to be quite interesting. And I was really struggling to put vehicles into this area so that it's going to look natural, let's say. I had to download a couple of mods. I had to download, well, actually one mod. I had to download the cargo hold fix. I'm not exactly sure how it's called these days, but it's basically the mod that makes the cargo trains only leave the edge of the map with full capacity, right? So there's going to be fewer of the vehicles, and it's just going to be much better. And I also tweaked the capacity of some of the cargo cars, cargo trucks in the city, and also the trains, so that they have much higher capacity, and there are going to be fewer or a higher number of vehicles leaving the train station. I'm not exactly sure how I did it, but basically I was struggling with the fact that when a fully loaded cargo train came into the station, it spawned a huge number of trucks, and it was just looking bad because there was like a line, like a conga line of cargo vehicles just leaving all these train stations, and it was just looking super weird. So especially when there were just one after the other of the cargo trains as well. So that was not exactly looking good, so I tweaked the capacity. I changed some speed limits for these roads and the railroads, and I finally tweaked it so that it's going to look more natural and there are going to be fewer cargo vehicles just leaving the industrial zone. It's not going to look all that crowded, I suppose, with all the trucks, even though it would probably make sense, but it was a bit too much, so I kind of toned it down a bit. You are going to see that in the cinematics, as well as the trains that are going to be moving through the area. One unfortunate thing is that the cargo trains that I'm using here are the same engine types as the passenger trains, obviously with different cars, the cargo cars, but they don't work with the vehicle effect. So unfortunately, the engine of the cargo train does not puff out smoke. So that's something that's going to be noticeable, but maybe not so much. Obviously the most important part is that it's moving through the area. So that's looking very good. That's what I was trying to have here. Some kind of moving elements throughout the industrial zone, not just trucks, not just people, but also the trains. This is something that I really wanted to build here right from the start. When I downloaded this asset from the workshop, I knew exactly that it's going to be part of this new industrial zone. And those are the conveyor belt bridges, right? Or the conveyor bridges. So I definitely wanted to have them go throughout the area, throughout the complex, and also over that main avenue. I did it just once. And these kind of pipes, also very nice detail that's going to just bring this entire industrial area to a completely new level. This is something that I was also using in Aurelia, but these are just pipes, so might as well use them in Altengrad as well. And all these tiny little details that I'm just adding are definitely adding more life to this entire project. I really like doing these industrial areas. I was doing some of those smaller ones near the cargo harbor, and those were kind of limiting, and I also wanted to only build them with older looking structures, or just make them look old. But with this modern factory complex, I was really happy to just use all these different elements, all these different buildings, and then detail all of it and just see how it's progressing, and clipping all these buildings together, creating some custom shapes of the buildings. So that's looking very, very good. And obviously these large buildings are also serving, I didn't really comment that, but you could have seen that in the time lapse, that I hid the cargo train stations inside of these buildings. So on that riverside, I placed it inside the U-boat hulls because they are super huge. By the way, I was using it's called the Kansas Freight Station or something, because it's very small. It has a small footprint, so it's perfect candidate for being hidden inside these buildings. And on the opposite side of the main street, I built it inside of that large structure that I kind of customized from smaller buildings. Those were procedural objects, by the way. That's the instance of buildings in the industrial zone that are not working because they are just procedural objects. And for a good reason, they wouldn't have road access anyway because they are so small. And I just wanted to have a lot of them to kind of form like a bigger just factory floor, right? And I had to raise it slightly because the train station building was a bit too tall. But now that I'm thinking of it, I could have probably used just the station tracks for the cargo station, even though I'm not sure if in the railway replacer mod there are the cargo station. I know there are passenger stations, but I wasn't sure about cargo stations. And cargo stations are kind of problematic in the game because they have that one point where cars just, exit or spawn, basically. And it's not exactly working right. It's working all right with the vanilla stations, kind of, but some custom stations, cargo stations that you download from the workshop are not exactly all that nice. If you've been watching my streams when I was playing the Rockdale City long time ago, you know that I've been struggling with that behavior a lot, especially when the nodes for the despawning and spawning of the vehicle are overlapping. It basically means that the vehicles are just going to be stuck there, and it's going to lower the capacity. So that was also something that I was really struggling with. And that's pretty much the reason why I'm only doing like one-way streets into the station, so that vehicles are just not going to, cross each other's paths, and it's going to go all smoothly. So in the end, it worked out. It's probably best that those train station buildings are hidden, because you can't see this behavior, how the vehicles are despawning and respawning. So it's just much better that you're only going to see the trucks leave these larger structures, right? It's something that I'm probably going to do even in the future, just hiding some of the functional elements of the game into some of the decorative elements, right? Even though these are not decorative, because these buildings are actually working, and they have a lot of workers, and they produce a lot of stuff. So that's very nice. Anyway, while I was explaining this, we mostly finished the industrial zone. So one thing that I really needed to do last was some detailing. Lots of surfaces. There are lots of those pavement surfaces absolutely everywhere. And then some details. So especially stains, especially some of these stains, decals on the surfaces, because they are just a bit too plain with only the pavement. But also some of the crates, some parked trucks, empty trucks, and lamp posts, all those kinds of details that you would see in an industrial zone. And I also did some detailing with this main street. So I only kept the pavement where there are the tram stops, and I did the surface painter with the ruined terrain all around the tracks where there are no tram stops. So it's looking much cleaner. Anyway, this was the transition between the before and after state of the city. And again, the angle is kind of distorting this view, but the industrial zone is huge. Let me tell you that the industrial zone is really huge, and it's just forming a very nice edge of the city like I was planning. You can see that there are the trees on that left side of the industrial zone in here. By the way, I recolored some of those industrial buildings into like a brighter white, because these buildings are new, right? So it makes sense that they are going to be kind of shinier. And some of the buildings I kept with brown colors, but still slightly shinier than these buildings are probably going to look like in the future. And in the future, I can definitely recolor them back into some less bright colors, maybe even change some of the colors. But overall, the industrial zone might actually change. Maybe some of the buildings are just going to be removed, and maybe more modern areas or modern buildings, factories are going to be built here. This zone definitely has a lot more room for expansion. The main road with the trams is just going to continue somewhere. I'm not sure. I'm probably just going to build like a loop for the trams, and the roads are just going to continue somewhere else. But there are definitely going to be more open areas around here. They're not going to be filled with anything just yet, because there might be some expansion later as we progress with the series. So some kind of more modern factories that I kind of do have still from the workshop. So, we can always do something. Anyway, guys, in the next episode, we are going to return more towards the center of the city, and we are going to do some kind of a project on the river. We are going to build a power station, some kind of a project related to the water physics. So that's something to look forward to. It's going to be quite interesting. I already started building it on the live stream, if you've noticed. Anyway, guys, that is all for today's episode of the Altengrad city. Thank you for watching. If you liked this episode, you can put a thumbs up underneath it. You can share the video with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and you can become a channel member through the join button below. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.